Traveling on the train for the first time can be very daunting if you've never planned a US train trip. There are many mistakes you can make, like possibly booking the wrong trip, or not knowing what to pack, or not knowing what side of the train to sit on to get the best views, which are all very common mistakes that people make when riding Amtrak or other scenic train rides. But as someone who has taken the most scenic train rides around the country and is now taking more train rides abroad, I have 10 mistakes you should avoid on train travel, but especially as a first timer if you are riding Amtrak. So keep watching this video and subscribe to know all of the best train travel tips. The first mistake I often see of new train travelers, especially if you're riding Amtrak trains, is not researching by the routes. Many people log into Amtrak.com and just go in and put in 2 random cities they want to go to, and voila, I think they're going to get a train ride. However, that is not how the US train system is built, unfortunately, and it makes it a bit more harder to figure out which routes are more feasible for you to take. And while there are cities where that is an option, like for me being in Milwaukee, I can go from Milwaukee to Chicago relatively easily. Not all cities are that well connected in the Amtrak system. So to find the best train routes for you, you need to go to amtrak.com/train-routes. On there, you will see a list of a ton of different routes. I think they have over 30 routes you can take, and they also show you the length and time of each route and all of the stops, which gives you a better idea of which routes are more feasible for you than just putting into random cities. And when you're booking, always make sure you can see the name of the train under the train icon, or when you click trip details. There, it'll list the trains that you're on, the times, and all the information you need to book the ride. And if you want to know more about how to book a US scenic train trip, I do have a whole video that I will link in the description box below. The second mistake I see people make as first-time train riders is not planning for delays. Now, I don't know how other countries work outside of taking a train in Mexico, but train delays are very common, especially in the US where Amtrak shares the tracks. So I always recommend that first-time train travelers build in downtime after their train ride, not only because you'll probably want to relax in a real bed and also get some fresh air, but because the train will probably be delayed. Instead of trying to book a tour right when your train is scheduled to arrive, I recommend giving yourself the evening or giving yourself a full day before planning more activities or even hopping to a different destination. That helps you build in time for those delays so that you don't have to go back and go through the hassle of rebooking a hotel or rebooking another form of transportation or rebooking any activities that you may have already planned. The third mistake I see people make, especially with Amtrak, is not signing up for their guest rewards. Most people don't know that Amtrak also has a points-based reward system to give you points every time you take an Amtrak ride. Very similar to airlines, it's free to sign up, and as you are booking trips on Amtrak, you are acquiring points. Now, you do need a lot less points compared to flying to get a free train trip in the US. But it's definitely worth it because you never know, after taking a few of the scenic train rides like the California Zephyr and the Empire Builder and the Coast Starlight, which are 3 of the most scenic and the longest train rides you can take, I was able to get a few free train rides when I want to go from Milwaukee to Chicago. So I can attest that it does work, and if you take enough rides, it'll pay off. The fourth mistake I see people making on overnight train rides in particular is not packing shower shoes or flip-flops. This is for those rides where you may book the roomette and you get access to the shared shower. I don't know about y'all, but dorm life taught me that you always in a college dorm wear your flip-flops in the shower due to sanitary reasons. While your roomette may be just yours, you are still sharing space with other people, and for me, I like to keep it clean, so I always pack a pair of flip-flops into my bag for a train ride. And they don't have to be super fancy flip-flops, just throw them in your bag so that you're able to have it and have peace of mind as your feet are in the shower. The fifth mistake that first-time train riders make, especially for the longer overnight cross-country routes, is not bringing things to do. I do have a whole video on how to avoid boredom on a long overnight scenic train ride, but I always recommend that you bring activities, a deck of playing cards, your journal, your books, your tablet or your iPad if you want to download some movies and TV shows. There are tons of things you can do to fill your time that may or may not require Wi-Fi or extra technology, so make sure you pack those things on your train ride or it's going to be a very long few days. And while it's always good to have things to do, I also always recommend that people sleep and relax as two of their activities when they're on the train, because the train is very relaxing. A common mistake for first-time train riders is not looking at the menus of the food you may be having on the train. Now, this is really for people who are booking the roomette. You can eat on Amtrak and the dining car, but you have to pay for it if you're not in a roomette, aka if you are riding in coach. And Amtrak menus definitely vary. They do have some vegan options, they have some vegetarian options, and they have a lot of meat options, but whichever menu you're going to have may be different from other videos you have seen on YouTube. So I recommend going to amtrak.com/dining-car to learn about the different menus that they have on the routes, because the West Coast routes are different from the East Coast routes, and sometimes you're not going to have the full-on dining car depending upon the scenic ride you're on. So you need to know if you need to pack additional snacks, additional food, or whatever the case may be for your scenic train ride. The seventh mistake that is pretty common among first-time train riders is not really getting to know the car attendants on the train. Now, if you do book a roomette, you will have a car attendant who will be checking in on you throughout your train ride. But even if you aren't, I've had some really cool conversations with the people who work in the cafe car or who are walking through the train, just checking in, making sure everything is going well. And I personally don't like when people are rude to travel staff, because they're just doing their jobs even if you do get delayed. So I recommend talking to them. They are full of knowledge. Some of them more know about the routes than others, but if you do meet one of the attendants who is pretty open and pretty nice, I always recommend asking them, hey, do you have any tips for other routes that I should take? Where should I sit on the train to get the best view? Those kind of conversations that aren't super distracting them from their job, but also are very genuine in you asking their opinion based on their many years of experience of being on Amtrak trains. The eighth mistake that many first-time train riders make is not booking the train for the season they actually want to see the sights. So once you go to amtrak.com and you see all of those routes, you have to decide, do you want to see it in spring or summer or even winter or fall, depending upon the route. So for example, a train that is on my bucket list is the train from New York City to Montreal. However, according to the internet, the best time to take that train ride is actually in the fall versus the summer or spring, because in the fall you'll be able to see the leaves change as you go through the northern part of New York. Knowing what season that you want to take the train is also important due to natural disasters. When I booked the California Zephyr in July of 2021, they had a series of mudslides, so I was unsure if the train ride was even going to be able to go on the routes, because that would impact whether or not we could see the Rocky Mountains or if they would have to stop the train ride early. But on the flip side, there are people who love taking the California Zephyr in the winter to see the Rocky Mountains covered in snow. So knowing the season of whichever train ride you want to take will definitely affect the views. Generally, the safe choice is to take it in late spring or in the summertime, because that is the most temperate part of the year, especially in the US across the country. However, it can depend. A ninth and very common mistake of first-time train riders is not getting to the observation car on Amtrak early enough. When I took the California Zephyr, which was my first scenic train ride in the US, I didn't realize that it got really crowded in Denver. And so I had to make sure that I got a seat on the Denver to Sacramento route, because that is the most scenic part of the train ride. So when it came time to go to the Rocky Mountains, I almost didn't have a seat. If you are new to Amtrak and new to the observation car, I always recommend listening to when they announce that they're about to approach one of the most scenic parts, and they even might warn you that, hey, if you've been on the train, it is about to get pretty crowded in the observation car, so you might want to claim a seat. But if they don't announce it, I recommend going a few stops before, just to make sure you have a spot. And if you're curious on what those stops are, you can always go to the Amtrak website. They do a highlight of what you will see on the train, and you can kind of guess when you'll get to the most scenic part or what city the most scenic part is, and from there you're able to plan when is the best time to get in the observation car. And if you want to get a table in the observation car, I recommend getting there even earlier, because those tables are a hot commodity for the kids and families who may be on the train. But even as a solo traveler, you can sit there. Just know that you'll be able to share that space, or you should share the space with other travelers, because there's no need to hoard a whole table if you're traveling traveling alone. And the 10th mistake that I often hear about and even see on my comments when I post about train travel is people not understanding that the train ride is the trip. A lot of folks will comment on my videos and say, that is so expensive, I would never spend so much money on a train ride. Or they'll say, well, you could go to the Caribbean or Europe or some other part of the world for the same amount of money. However, when you are booking a train ride, you have to remember that the train is the trip. And booking a train, especially booking a train ride in the US with a roomette, is costly. Spent $400 on a roomette or $600 or even $800 plus. In my mind, that is the cost of the trip. The train is the experience. So instead of sightseeing and planning all those tours, all of that money you would be spending, essentially you splurge on the train ride itself, because the train is the journey and the train is the trip. And I think because of the price, a lot of folks psych themselves out and think that they can't do a train ride, but there is always a coach option. It might not be as comfortable, but if you really want to see the sights, I highly recommend booking the trip. You never know when you'll have the opportunity to do it again, and I believe it's truly worth the experience. So those are the mistakes that I often see first-time train travelers making. I hope this video was helpful. If you want more information on other tips and tricks that you should know as a first-time train traveler, especially for my Amtrak riders here in the US, I do have a blog post that goes more into depth on some of these tips and other videos on my train travel tips and vlogs playlist for you to check out. As someone who takes the train often, I am excited to see more people get into train travel. I know people are interested in traveling more sustainably or traveling slowly, and that makes me so excited to see how train travel can evolve, hopefully with more routes and more accessibility and cheaper prices in the years to come. So thank you so much for watching. Leave any comments or questions below, and of course I will see you all in my next video. Bye everyone, stay curious.